writer of both fiction and fanfiction, and this is how I wrote the first draft of my new novel in 8 days. In this video, I'm going to present the strategy that made this absurd-sounding achievement possible. Our modifiers are focus, functionality, efficiency, and experience. I'm going to guide you through the process start to finish so that you may utilize it the same way I did. I'll preface this by saying that I artificially created a set of very unique circumstances that allowed me to adjust the modifiers in my favor, which I'll elaborate on later. But I firmly believe that this is the fastest way to pop out a first draft regardless of your situation. You know how people speedrun games? Well, this is a guide on how to speedrun first drafts. Here goes! Let's start with explicitly defining our goal. The first draft has one job and one job only, and that is to exist. It's not supposed to be good, only functional. Think of it as constructing a skeleton for your novel, so that you may layer it with everything else later down the line. A sort of baseline that you can trust and rely on when adding in things like foreshadowing or beautiful writing. The first draft reveals flaws in your structure that you couldn't have possibly noticed otherwise. Perhaps you introduced your antagonist too late, or your characters can't really shine in the bounds of the chosen narrative. Such discrepancies cannot be spotted without a bird's eye view, which is why we so desperately need a first draft to exist and provide us with set perspective. So with that said, let's talk about how I actually wrote it this fast and how you could do that too. First, I allocated a time frame in which I did nothing but write. I hijacked the Easter holidays for this, and when I tell you I did almost nothing else, I mean it. Making a concentrated effort and writing for a full week is so much more effective than putting in a few hours every other Sunday, because you don't need to leave that focused mindset achieved when writing for a long time. 2. Write a plot outline. Yes, for the full novel. Dig deep. I wrote a scene-by-scene breakdown of the entire novel, including key points and dialogue. That deep. And I know that many people don't write with an outline. Heck, I usually don't. My plans for a novel are often a collection of cool moments that I stitch together using the tried and true method of winging it. And it works! I wrote most of my projects that way. Why change a winning horse then? The short answer is that we prioritize efficiency. The longer answer is that foregoing an outline inevitably invites plot holes to settle in your manuscript. They can be fixed, certainly, but it's difficult, time-consuming work, and we're attempting to conserve our resources. But what happens when you're actually writing the first draft and you realize that your outline doesn't suit your needs? What I did was mark the parts that change and move on. But in hindsight, I'd suggest actually rewriting your outline from that point forward to accommodate the change. Either way, I couldn't recommend writing a scene-by-scene breakdown of your plot enough. Mine was 12 pages and 6,500 words long, if that gives you any sense of the work involved. It took me 5.5 hours and probably saved me at least 100 more. 3. Now that you have your plot outline, run it by someone, anyone, who's willing to give you the time of day. It can be a beta reader if you have one, a friend, a sibling, anybody. You don't need someone who writes or even reads, just someone who consumed any form of media ever, so that they can tell you if your plot makes sense. That's all. If you can run it by a few people, even better. They'll ask you questions as they read your notes, where the plot doesn't click for them, or if something is missing. Take these questions as feedback and remedy the disparity before it ever becomes a problem. With that part done, you effectively have the green light to finally start writing. 4. With the goal of drafting as efficiently as possible, you simply can't afford to strive for perfection. If you kept your draft to the bare bones, rewriting the flawed sections would be neither time-consuming or difficult. If you poured every last ounce of your skill into your work, however, coming to terms with the fact that you need to discard a section of your story sucks. A lot. Don't bother looking for typos or writing beautiful paragraphs or whatever. Don't describe locations unless their layout is relevant to the plot. Don't describe character appearances or sounds or smells. All that can wait until later. In this stage, you're constructing a play-by-play turn of events, nothing more. Basically, skip anything that requires intricacies. Leave notes for yourself on how you visualize a scene, but don't go into details. For example, I didn't write the final fight scene in my novel. I just outlined what actually happens and moved on, because it will have changed by the next draft anyway, and we're all about conserving time. 5. In the same vein, don't edit anything. If you wrote a scene that led you to a dead end, delete it and start over. No editing. It's a rabbit hole. And as soon as you concede to the sweet promise of, oh, I'll just make it a little bit neater, you're screwed. You're done. Remember, you're speedrunning this. You have no time for finesse, only functionality. 6, and finally, something I've hinted at. Take notes while you write. Things like, make sure that the characters have privacy for this conversation. Or start building up to this plot twist earlier. Introduce a secondary love interest. Whatever. Don't actually do it in the moment if it requires going back on what you already wrote. Only move forward, never back. These notes will help you overcome the need to pause and fix things immediately when they could really stand waiting. And with a note taken, you can continue as if the mistake was remedied. And that's it. It's hard work as always. That's the one part I did not find a shortcut for. But it's so ridiculously effective, and the result is so much easier to refine and edit. I have never put in so little effort and achieved so much. Now, remember how I mentioned stacking the variables in my favor? I've laid out my strategy for maximizing focus, functionality, and efficiency, but what about the experience bit? At the time when I undertook this challenge, I'd been writing and uploading a quarter novel's worth of fanfiction every month for 7 months. I only had 3 days to dedicate to the task, so I had to master writing well and quickly. Necessity breeds efficiency, which is why I was able to acquire this knowledge to begin with. It deserves mentioning, I think, though I still firmly believe that this method guarantees the fastest results when it comes to writing first drafts. Your experience may differ from mine, which does affect your starting point, but by maximizing the other 3 variables, you guarantee that you achieve the best result possible for you. And that's the best one can ever strive for, really. With that in mind, let's go over the statistics attached to my own execution of this method. The outline, as I mentioned before, it took me 5 hours and 40 minutes. It was 6,500 words initially, but had climbed to 7,000 after I got feedback for it, which took another hour and 10 minutes. The writing itself spanned over 8 days, one of which I was too sick to write. You could argue that the draft only took 7 days in that case, but I decided that I won't settle for technically correct. These are my word counts per day of work. On average, I wrote about 2,000 words per hour. I'd usually write at about half that for the first hour, then pick up the speed later into the writing session, as I got used to the effort involved. In total, I wrote about 54,000 words in around 22 hours over the span of 8 days. It was one of the hardest things I ever did, but I could not be happier with the result. It really is much easier to edit and improve on. If we were to account for the time spent writing the outline and consulting the person who read it, the first draft took me just under 29 hours of work. It sounds very little, but trust me, it's not. I spent the days following the draft's completion recuperating. I'd do it again in a heartbeat though, it was so worth it. I hope you find my insights helpful, and if there's anything else you'd like me to cover in future videos, let me know in the comments below. And I hope to see you around again. Bye!